This conference will now be recorded.
Can people hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so she'll be back in.
Sorry about that, everyone. It's one of those Murphy's Law things where it was working perfectly for the 15 minutes we had it set up, and then it just crashed right when we were ready to go. We're going to give it a few more minutes for people to join back in. Apologies again for the hiccups.
Should we go ahead and try and reconnect?
Yes. Yep. It should be all up and running now. So when you reconnect and get back into GoToMeeting, it should be showing the opening slide with a pretty picture of, not sure what mountains those are, but maybe somebody knows.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture.
Nice aspens.
Good morning.
Good morning, all. We're just going to give it another minute or two. We had those hiccups, and now it looks like we're back up and running, thankfully.
Well, we got confused with that email that went out yesterday. I'm going to go back into my other line because there are people waiting at that one that went out yesterday. So I'll be back.
Okay, I think it should be the same line in connection. Uh-oh. Forgot to hold music.
They all left, apparently.
Okay. Good. Yeah, it should all be plugging in on the same GoToMeeting connection. It's just that we had some technical issues with the platform, with the app that crashed. So hopefully we're all back up and running now. We'll just give it maybe one more minute and then get going.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Good morning, and really appreciate you making the call today. This is our let's see, we had our kickoff meeting in January, or in December, and then we had our January meeting with Peppo, and then meeting last month. So this will be our fourth meeting of the implementation working group, and we really appreciate everybody that's been able to participate in this, and I'm looking forward to today's call. We're going to go ahead and do like we've been doing, put things on mute for a little bit, and then we can either open up the lines later, or people could unmute themselves through the process as we have questions, and we'll also have some polling questions come up too. So mostly putting you on mute so that you can't badmouth our technical difficulties we had. So thank you, everybody. Starting everything out. So just wanted to quickly go over where we've been to date. So speaking of those last meetings, some of the things that we covered in those were a little bit about our process and branding. Kind of that image on the right shows how we're really looking at the technical update to the water plan, formerly SWASI, the implementation, the basin implementation plans, and the comprehensive update of the water plan itself is really a whole package deal. We are working on these things often in tandem, but they also do have a sequential process, and so we're trying to kind of use the branding that helps mirror that, and we talked and got some good feedback on that at the meeting with Peppo. We talked a little bit about procurement and contracting as we think about moving from the technical update into the basin implementation plan process, and really looking at a general contractor model that would work with local basin experts in the roundtables to update the BIPs. We talked a lot about the just kind of IPP data gaps that we have, and I'll show a slide on that, kind of reminding us where we've been and where we're going today, and the possible development of a IPP database. We talked a lot about project tiers at our last meeting, and some of the terminology and words are important, and making sure that we get the words right in any kind of project tiering matrix that we might develop. And we've got some progress that we've made on that since our last meeting. And then we talked a lot about timeline for the basin updates themselves, the basin implementation plan update, and the water plan update.
Just a quick reminder for folks to mute their phones if you can. We're getting a little bit of feedback from, I think, somebody's phone. So just try to hit the mute button on the app for GoToMeeting and make sure you've got that muted. Also, we do have the chat feature enabled, so if you do have any burning questions, feel free to use the chat feature, and we will get to the questions.
Should we manually mute them?
And we can manually mute too here in a second. If we're still getting that feedback, we'll try that.
Sure.
But we'll go ahead and press on. So we talked again, just that last bullet, talked about a bit of the timeline for the basin updates and for the water plan update itself, and really specifically talking about the basin updates, talked about a kind of a 2-year window, kind of soft launch, true to the water plan, implementing or initiating that update beginning of 2018, and really using this working group as a way to kind of flesh out some of the details around that as we work through some of the procurement issues, and then looking at the C9, the Colorado 9 Roundtable Summit in Winter Park this September as more of a hard kickoff to that process that would initiate kind of a 2-year window for updating the basin implementation plans, and kind of a tandem process, hoping to catch some efficiencies for also updating the water plan at a similar time, and hoping to have that completed about a year after. So one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today, just before we launch into things, is just kind of our process here at CWCB and what we're hoping to get out of this. We've had a lot of good kind of one-on-one conversations with different kind of members of the implementation working group that have been really fruitful just in helping us understand better, kind of highlighting some of our goals that we're trying to get out of this. And for us, it's, this whole process is really, we're trying to be on time, save time, and improve our process. So for being on time, really trying to stay true to the goals that are in the water plan. We're still getting some of that feedback, folks. If everybody could just make sure they're on mute, that would be helpful.
What other options? No one was coming up with any other options. And
there we go. So thank you.
Yep.
So just to hit on these again. So on time, trying to stay true to the goals that are in the water plan, and of course focused on implementation, but understanding that the water plan is equal parts water implementation and also water planning, and that there are goals around water planning, specifically around SWASI and the basin implementation plans and the water plan itself, and updating all of those. And so we're trying to kind of keep everything humming along and working in sequence. And obviously you have a plan, you work a plan, but we are constantly monitoring that plan and making improvements as we go along, and looking to use this group really as a way to streamline that process. So in terms of streamlining, that's really speaking to our goal of saving time. We're hopeful that in future iterations of this technical update or the water plan itself, that we can increasingly work to kind of catch some efficiencies and bake some things into the process that just make it a lot easier. Our investment this time around of just how we're doing the technical update using the Colorado Decision Support System, it really is a process by which, once we get it updated and increasingly focused and lasered in on some of the nodes and have the models up and ready to run, that in theory we could run those more quickly. So it's an example of where we're trying to move things to a system where we can be a little bit more efficient and streamline our process moving forward, which hopefully saves Basin's time and effort as well. And then just improve the process, really we've heard some comments about our process not being that transparent. Of course, we're always constantly at roundtable meetings and working with the roundtables, and this SWASI process, this technical update process, certainly included working with a technical advisory group at the initiation. And at the same time, just whether it's procurement or working on our process, working with contractors, working on modeling, things take time. And in that kind of time window, that time gap, things tend to, we've got that black box kind of feedback. And we're trying to be more transparent and use this group as a way to kind of peel back some of the onion layers and help expose some of the issues that we're dealing with and get some groupthink around what makes the most sense. So it's really trying to make a more transparent process, enhance our data, and streamline things so that we can just simply report out better, whether it's a report to the legislature or a request from the media or a question that one of the roundtables has. Having an online database that's updated, that's clear and easy to use just makes the process that much quicker and that much simpler, and really speaks to greater collaboration. So if there's a fourth bullet in here, I think that fourth bullet is really around collaboration and around being responsive to Basin feedback. So part of that feedback, again, just trying to touch on us trying to be a little bit more clear about what our goals are. So hopefully just stepping through that helps kind of frame up where we're coming from in some of this. But really to also work with basins on BIPs and IPP updates. That was, something that we've heard even on these working group calls is, gosh, we don't have, the volunteer group. We don't have a lot of staff or time or money to burn on these things. We want to spend money on implementation. How can we support that process? We've really been trying to be responsive to that, whether it's the funding request that we're putting through in the projects bill and hopefully it gets approved, or whether it's, utilizing this group to kind of set up a system and processes and guidance and roadmaps for updating the basin plans or moving to this general contractor model that hopefully provides some kind of support staff to the basins. We also heard a lot about just supporting project prioritization and methods, but not making that oversight, but really working with basins on just how, what's a process that we can develop to streamline, what projects fall in what categories and how you naturally prioritize projects that come in. That's something we talked a lot about last time. We'll talk more about here today. And then really supporting implementation to advocate for funding. Everything that we're doing, whether it's the streamlined approach so we can be faster and more responsive to basin requests or legislative requests, all goes back ultimately to supporting funding and funding that goes back to basins. We've also got obviously some bigger funding discussions that are going around, and improving our data and kind of having a more clear and concise way that we can export data is really helpful to kind of meeting those goals and understanding where we're at. So that's kind of just an overview of where we've been and what we're hoping to get out of today. We're going to put some questions up for you guys here shortly, and so if you can log into the Poll Everywhere account, you can actually do that online if you'd like as well, or you can text 22333 and then enter the message CWCB18, and then that will log you in. So if you guys can do that, that's also up on the screen right now. Again, it's text 22333 with the message CWCB18. That will set you up so that we can kind of seamlessly fly through a few polling questions we have. For today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about BIP update, like what is the scope of this BIP update, and just starting to kind of touch on that a bit and hopefully be digging in subsequent calls. We'll talk about plan integration. So, when you're updating BIPs, what sorts of plans need to be included? Project tiers and terminology, following up on our last call discussion and making some progress there. And then looking at the technical update assumptions and recommendations, and starting to kind of give you guys a little bit of insight of some of the things that we're dealing with, and start to lay the foundation for some of the recommendations that this group might have as we lead into the BIP updates. So that's where we're headed today, and we'll just take these kind of one at a time. So in terms of scoping the basin updates, we've had some interns, some students that are working on kind of going back through and looking at the basin plans, and we really are trying to get this kind of order of magnitude understanding of how much needs to be updated. The basin plans, when they were first developed, obviously they didn't exist, so it was a huge lift, and I think that there's a lot of memory of how much work that was, and we were trying to wrap our heads around exactly what that lift might be, and provide at least a little bit of a baseline back to the basins and ultimately maybe to this general contractor and the local experts that are hired for this process to kind of be able to hit the ground running a bit. So in some level, the detail is pretty granular about, what specific chart might need to be updated if there were new information from SWASI or the technical update. In some cases, we've just looked at this higher level, what types of areas look like they needed to be improved or updated. So if we look at information about the basin, that's 8%. That may not change a lot, but projects represents 41.6% of, and this is just one example. We actually use the Gunnison as an example, but that represents, 41.6% are projects, and so that may be the bigger area to focus on and may have more update needs. Or we've heard a lot of feedback. I think even the roundtable or at the CWCB board level of going back and looking at the BIPs and some of the information in there being a bit outdated. So that might be the main area to focus on. So we're starting to dig into that and hoping to go through all the BIPs and provide this level of detail, if not more granular, to each of the basins and folks on this call representing the basins at our next meeting. So another thing that they're looking at are just references. One of the things that we've kind of looked at is, we're trying to find right now we've got the mandate in the water plan to update, whether it's SWASI or the BIPs or the water plan itself on a certain cycle. But, does that cycle make sense? When we're talking about the next iteration of the water plan, should that cycle change? We get a lot of feedback of, whether it's not being updated soon enough, or gosh, it feels like we just did this, so do we need to update things again? I think one of the things that potentially dictates how frequently you update is the relevance of that information. So this chart here is summarizing, just as an example in the Gunnison, the number of references and the areas referenced of what year. So you can see that there's data that goes back to 1998. That may be totally legitimate. If you were going to obviously make a reference to the Colorado Compact, you'd have a pretty old date in there, and that is totally valid. At the same time, there may be a master plan that's 10 years old or 20 years old that's being referenced that has some updates and some more clear information. So just trying to get an understanding, again, of what the lift is in the updates, where the focus should be, and trying to take that first cut at helping, say, like page 52, for example, looks like it has a chart that maybe needs to be updated. By the way, that chart also appears on page 93 and 107, so could it just be referenced once, and try to find ways, again, thinking about streamlining and efficiency that kind of makes the updates just a little easier as we move forward. So what's next to expect? As I alluded to, we're really going to work towards this next implementation working group call of having basin-specific BIP update information. So this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the types of information that we're getting using the Gunnison, but we're hopeful to have that and send that out hopefully in advance or during the call that we have next. We are also going to be asking for your help identifying some of the goals for the C9 Summit. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today get pretty granular, and as we bring everybody together, we need some help from you thinking about the process from where we're at today to when that Basin Implementation Plan update really initiates kind of at the contractor level and working with the roundtables, and what are the logical steps in between now and then that really help kind of even just streamline that process of communication and what level of detail we need to go into. And then we are going to ask you guys for a bit of help on developing a roadmap. The image that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the BIP guidance, was the CWCB developed guidance that was sent out in advance of the first BIPs. That is about an 8-page document, and it's pretty granular. We've taken a stab at trying to make something that's a bit of a roadmap that maybe is more of a 2 or 3-pager. And we would like to get your feedback, and that will be in your inboxes by tomorrow to help us think through kind of some of the goals, the reasons for the updates, and really even some of the thought process around what areas to update are critical and what areas to update may be more optional, and getting your input of helping us develop a bit of the scope of that and the framework that we want to deliver, understanding that that document may be something that we would ultimately print, hand out, and deliver at the C9 Summit. So next, I'll talk a little bit about plan integration. I think we have a question in here, but one thing that's come up a lot as we've talked with roundtables, and there's certainly a lot of grants that have gone out for implementing programs and implementing plans. But what types of plans need to be integrated into the BIP updates? So it should be into the BIP updates here. But we know stream management plans have been a hot topic. Some are pretty comprehensive and broad in scope. There may be other master plans or water quality plans. Even I've had some talks with folks in DOLA about resilience plans or climate plans that may come into play. I want to take a pause here and maybe ask, do you have a question in there?
Oh, nope, not for that.
Oh, okay. So then what we'll do is we'll ask for feedback in the chat, or you can send us emails, and it's also something that we can kind of follow up on our next meeting. But wanted to kind of stop and pause and say, what kind of things, if we were handing out a framework or roadmap to basins or local contractors, what are the scope of planning documents that need to be included in an update that maybe we're not thinking of? So again, stream management plans are a good one, that there have been just a plethora of new plans that are pretty detailed and have some good information. The idea here is not to duplicate efforts, but to really build off existing efforts, and just looking for some input from you. Again, if you want to utilize the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, if you have thoughts of things that aren't included here that absolutely need to be integrated, that would be helpful.
And this is Greg Johnson. I would just add, as Russ had stated, that a lot of this work is really trying to target what makes sense to update, so to be as strategic as possible, and not just update the entire basin plan that you guys have just for the sake of updating it, but just to be fairly specific about the pieces of that need to be updated, but also to look at what would be more of an online resource and what really needs to be in print, in writing, in a PDF or a hard copy report. And I think a lot of this moving forward, just like a lot of what we'll be releasing with the technical analysis, is going to be online tools and databases and things that you all can use, as opposed to going to a big kind of unwieldy multi-page document. So I think it's fair to say that a lot of things like stream management plans have done a lot of great work collecting and kind of synthesizing, coordinating a lot of data that's out there. And conceivably, this is something where we could, really have a data warehouse that we could help manage, that would have, at the very least, links to other resources that are on the web, if not bringing a lot of that data into things like our map viewer that we have. And so that things are all in one place, and things can be kind of turned off and on, and you can do a little bit more of that kind of personal analysis that you'd like to do with any given data source that we have. So I don't want to overpromise, but I think there's a lot of things that we can do in 2019, 2020 that we couldn't do 10 years ago. So I think we need to kind of keep that in mind as we're thinking about all these other data sources that are out there.
So we got one comment of just forest health plans and fire prevention plans. I think that's a great resource. If there's other ideas like that, I think it would just be nice to have some input from this group that we could take to the larger C9 at the C9 summit, and really as a framework or a roadmap for the basins and any contractors working on the basin implementation plans, to kind of have a hit the ground running with what they should be looking for, what they should be looking at. So we talked a lot last time about creating project tiers. One of the things that we talked about, and I'm covering this some again, we got some feedback from folks that have run into they may not have been able to make all the calls, so I'll just kind of quickly go over here, and then of course we have these recorded and on the website. But there are some gaps in our IPP lists. One thing that we kind of want to kick around with this group too, and I don't know if so much of a formal question, but be thinking of, we're trying our hardest to drop some of the acronyms. We're pretty guilty, especially when we're trying to bring new people into the process, or new roundtable members, or anybody visiting, of just kind of death by acronym, and we're trying to drop a lot of those. So one question for this group to think about is if we need to continue using IPPs or IPMPs, or if we can just say projects moving forward, understanding and maybe defining that projects encompass a range of different efforts. Either way, we have a lot of gaps in our project list currently. If you look across the basin, we've kind of identified these 20 categories roughly of different information that would be helpful, and that is spotty across the different basins. Now, to be fair, it's never been a mandate per se that all these had to be included, but some things like a name for the project that are missing, are just, it's not as helpful for being able to even kind of categorize or search or understand what the project is. Other things like cost, understandably, maybe it wasn't available, but part of the output from the technical update is developing a costing tool, so we're hopeful to mitigate that in the future. There are other things on here like firm yield, so this is the list of those 20 that we got some feedback last time. I think Kevin McBride said, well, that's kind of, depending on the project, that may be in the stage of the project, that may be hard to estimate. We understand that, and that was really helpful feedback, and I think feeds into maybe how we might start to think about any kind of project tiers. But on some level, if nothing else, the inclusion of this information or lack thereof is some sort of de facto prioritization, and we want to work with this group to say, does that make sense, and what other things need to be included? So having some of this information really helps. Sorry, I'm trying to read the questions that came in at the same time.
That's me.
Oh, okay. So some of this information really helps us with just being able to map projects or report out on where a project's taken place, or what the project is, or how much water, what the water source is, if we're counting the same water, or the projects overlapping, or are they discrete. So this really helps us identify and better kind of frame up where these projects are, what gap they're going to fill, and how they're helping to meet the goals in the water plan. So goals moving forward are really think about this, and we started to develop a little bit of a matrix based off of our last discussion and thinking about some of that input. So input that we heard is that tiers or ranking, some sort of ranking may be helpful. We got some comments on the phone to that effect. We also got some individual emails that basically own that the basins approve a lot of projects. Some of those may be better, some may be not as much, but there's no real way, certainly not a standardized way across basins to rank those currently. And so trying to look through, what some sort of ranking might look like to help basins better prioritize their needs. Terminology is key, we heard that. So we heard that shovel ready or having a project that's for implementation is really a key factor that we need to consider. And some input that was the primary focus, but then we heard, I think, equal input on the other side, and even from roundtable feedback since that feasibilities, sometimes it's a chicken and the egg issue. I think Jackie or Kevin had said that in the Yampa White Green last time, that sometimes we have issues of just getting a project off the ground. I know Mike Shimon and South Platte had said feasibility study is important to just getting a kind of a proof of concept of a project to see if it can move forward. And so some kind of equal ranking of a shovel-ready project and a feasibility study, and then maybe a third-tier classification that doesn't exclude people from putting projects in a database or bringing those to a basin, but understanding that they're just concepts that maybe not as well fleshed out, but maybe would change in the future or need an initial, maybe even some sort of nod of approval from the basin to move forward in some sort of permitting process was another comment that we heard. So we also heard some feedback of what things need to be considered. So water rights and permitting status were two things that popped up that we hadn't mentioned or talked about last time. And this chicken and the egg concept of sometimes you need initial approval before you can get, farther down the road on a permitting process that would get you to a shovel-ready effort. And so we want to make sure that we're not excluding those kind of projects. And we also heard that deadlines are helpful. We've heard that a couple of times at different meetings, whether it was here or with IBCC. But we're going to ask, and we're going to send out this draft matrix. I probably will stop short of running through it right now, just given some of the technical difficulties that we've had, but happy to talk to folks about it. I will highlight just a few things before, so it'll be in your inbox tomorrow, as well as this the draft kind of roadmap document that we talked about. So you'll have two things to weigh back in on. This is really totally draft open for your interpretation and really helping us drill down on the language. So the idea here is just that there are 4 tiers. 3 of those tiers meet some sort of approval level by the roundtable, but tier 1 is your priority level. And trying to help think through what makes it the highest priority for a basin. If you could only fund one thing, what would that one thing be and why? there's some of the criteria that we tried to loosely put in the language of that tier 1. So things like, for example, if I don't build this dam, it's going to flood out a city downstream, and there's going to be a loss of life, is a pretty compelling reason that might be in your upper category. It doesn't mean that your tier 2 project is a bad project at all, but you need some level of delineation. And we're taking kind of cues from other areas we've worked in, whether that's with stormwater or in IT, even, of how projects are delineated, even here at the state, of what makes a tier 1 versus a tier 2 project. It's not that the tier 2 project doesn't happen, but there is some sort of critical or criticality, if you will, to a tier 1 that puts it in that tier. And then there's a tier 3 that is also approved, but maybe all of these things don't track with, maybe there's varying levels of how ready they are. So again, getting to that shovel-ready concept. So we'll push this out and maybe just play around with it, see what you like, what you don't like, if it's helpful, if it's not, how you would change the language. And then we're really looking for input on that at our next meeting. If you notice, there are drop-down menus in here that you'll see when you open the spreadsheet. The first one that you'll come to is just the project phase. So there are 3 categories. There's either implementation, which is kind of our stab at the shovel ready. I mean, this is the implementation project. It's ready to go or about ready to go. There's the feasibility study. So again, thinking of that proof of concept, kind of needs funding to get off the ground or prove a model, or it's a programmatic effort that's a pilot potentially. And then there's an option for in the drop down of concept. And concept wouldn't allow you to rank it as a tier 1 like the other 2. The idea being that if it's just an idea that's not fully fleshed out, that maybe that is not going to ever fall out as your top tier priority. And so we tried to build in that, and then you can rank each of these with either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4, and then those ultimately tally up. And you'll have all the tabs so you can see the numbers of how points are weighted. There's nothing secret about this. The goal is hopefully to make something that's helpful, that can have enough streamlined language that it really takes some of the thinking out of where it falls and just allows you to say, yes, it absolutely makes sense in this category. No, it doesn't make sense here. Or in tier 4, largely the criteria just says it's not shown or not proven. So, for example, in here you'll see that it has alignment with the water plan as being a critical element, and there's needs 3 actions, 2 actions, or 1 action in tier 1, 2, or 3. In tier 4, it's not shown. So if somebody brings a concept project forward but hasn't shown that that's something that might be able to change their rating later, but at the time it's not shown. So as we're putting things into a database, for example, you could imagine maybe these questions would pop up and guide people through, and then it would have some kind of automatic tiering that this group would help us think through.
Awesome. Yeah, this is Greg again. I would just emphasize that this is very much a draft preliminary tool, as Russ noted, for us to get your feedback on. So this is not at all something that we're trying to really get all figured out and then make sure that the roundtables use it. The whole purpose for having this working group is to get your input on the details on stuff like this. So no, I mean, if you hate certain categories or the way certain things are laid out, that's absolutely fine. We just wanted to get something in front of you that you could react to and that you can really help us kind of craft to really work with this whole concept. And Russ has done an excellent job pulling this together. It does look like it's fairly polished, but we just wanted to get something in front of you that you could really see how something like this might play out. But again, we are not married to any particular aspect of this, and instead really want your feedback on kind of how this would be structured, what the categories are, kind of what those questions are. And then as Russ noted too, this is currently a very well-structured spreadsheet, so it does have drop-down menus so you can select some of these things. I think the vision moving forward is probably more likely that this would be something that would be hardwired into a website, an online database that we would have. And so as you would be entering your project data, the project proponent, the water provider or irrigation district or whoever, would be answering these questions along with the basic data inputs that they have when they're entering their project ID and their name and the volume and acre feet, whatever else. So I think that's where this would be headed. Probably would not be something where we would have everybody filling in different spreadsheets, emailing us spreadsheets. We want to get away from a process standpoint. We want to get away from things like that. So it would be much more of kind of a modern online system. But yeah, just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and we are happy to answer any questions on that, and especially after tomorrow when we get this in front of you.
Yeah, feel free to send feedback by email or collect your thoughts and bring them to the next meeting. If we're going to make substantial tweaks, I suppose getting feedback by email so we can make those changes in advance of the meeting would be helpful. But definitely would like to have a more robust dialogue once you've had some time to play around with it, break it, tell us what you hate, tell us what you like. I think what was helpful for me is just trying to think through a really strong project and maybe a weaker project, or maybe a project that was a really good project but didn't have a ton of detail behind it, and see where those things would rank and fall out. One thing you'll notice that there's some language on the bottom, which I'd also like some thoughts around how we tweak that language, or if people like it. But in you'll notice tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 all have some sort of level of support. So it just says a tier 1 would be a priority basin support, tier 2 would be full basin support, and tier 3 would be support of concept. Tier 4 would mean not currently supported. So this, again, in thinking about comments we heard, I think Kevin, again, did a really good job of just explaining, gosh, like, we could be in a permitting process that's locked up for a while. We need some initial basin support, and we need to show that potentially as part of moving that project forward. But obviously, it's not fully baked. So some of the categories in here allow you to kind of have that level of discretion where you could end up with still having a basin support something, it's just not falling out as their top tier. So help us think through that. Maybe none of this is good. Hopefully a lot of it is, but really just trying to honor feedback we heard from you and make sure that we're all on the same page and hearing the same thing.
And I would also add one more thing, that the goal of a lot of this is to streamline the process, as Russ had noted, that we want to simplify everyone's life, and take some of the work and the decisions off your plate. So the hope would be that we get this dialed in well enough with enough kind of rigid sideboards, that there doesn't have to be necessarily a subcommittee going through every single project at the Basin Roundtable level. That instead, the way that it is structured is so clear, that as projects are coming to the roundtable, as projects are being input into the database, that they naturally fall into, tier 1, 2, or 3, and not to add work, as far as reviewing projects, making some of those decisions. So we want to make sure that it's as clear as possible, and again, is streamlined moving forward is the thought, anyways.
I also don't want anybody to feel like this is their only bite at the apple for anything that we're working on. Again, just like I teed up, we really need your help thinking through, what is the process basically from now to 2 years out when the basin implementation plans are completed, right? What does that process look like? And, maybe more formally in the next few months, what's the process look like from now to the C9 summit, and getting some input on what we would display. Maybe this is something that we take to the summit and share with folks, and it still says draft on it. The idea isn't to have something necessarily fully baked. You've all been selected or opted into this process to help us think through these things. We understand it may not catch the cycle of going through your roundtable, and that's okay, because there's going to be time to do that stuff down the road, whether it's through the working group, or whether it's through local contractors, or whether it's through the roundtable proper, or whether it's through all three of those things, to kind of flesh this stuff out further. So again, give us your initial thoughts of, high level of what you like, what you don't, understanding that there'll be other iterations.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is Casey. Did I understand you to say that the various roundtables, IPPs had been entered into, are in a database and have been kind of superimposed in this ranking spreadsheet, or maybe not ranked, but are identified, so we could actually play around with real projects? Okay.
No, sorry, Casey. No, not at all. At this point, we don't have a database. What we do have, we have all the data that we've collected from the various different basin plans, and basically pulled things into one master spreadsheet, with the understanding that it's, even which data fields we have for each basin does not line up. There's a lot of inconsistencies. So we are a long ways off from having a proper online database, let alone, going back kind of retroactively and figuring out a tiering for projects that were already on those lists. So that's a whole nother process.
And that's hopefully something that will get folded into the Basin implementation plan updates. Really looking at the project list and saying what's come off, what do we know no longer exists or is no longer in the hopper being planned, what things have maybe moved up in priority, and maybe it is a crack at using this to tier some of the projects that are in there. Maybe not. I mean, we'll see what your feedback shows on how much you like this concept or not. But we're hopeful to develop something. I mean, keep in mind that we put some money in the projects bill for developing this database. So this is absolutely super preliminary. If we could move as fast as possible, I mean, at best, we might potentially have a database in a year. The reality is it's probably going to be twice that. So there will be plenty of time to go through this, and anything that we develop, we would definitely have some sort of process that we would go through to get stakeholder input and really let you guys step through this again. So this is the very first cut of what may be coming down the road if we get positive feedback from you guys. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit about scenarios and key assumptions in some of the technical update, SWASI update that we're working on now. So as you know, the scenarios working through IBCC and roundtables were developed. There's the 5 scenarios that are in the water plan. Tags help the technical advisory groups help set direction on the methodologies that we would use, including how to kind of use scenario planning. What happens is when you're looking at 5 different futures, you get a lot of data. You get 5 data sets where you may have had one big data set before. It creates a lot of questions, and as we've dug into the model, there are definitely a deeper level of detail that we're getting to. On a high level, we have some questions around what is the direction that should be set in the BIP updates. On some level, it'd be great to have a level of standardization across the basins. If you're looking at, one idea that came up was, gosh, should all basins model their top 3 projects? At the same time, some basins, don't necessarily, or at least haven't suggested that they want to do modeling. Other basins are really far ahead on modeling. And if they're already far ahead on modeling, they're making maybe their own assumptions or using a different set of criteria to have some sort of baseline that would tie back to the 5 scenarios, whether that's modeling 1 or modeling all 5. I don't know. It's something that we're trying to think through now and would like this group to maybe start to think about. So, if basins are going to model, would they model just their top projects? Would they just pick one to go through the exercise and better understand how the CDSS works and what issues are flagging, maybe just on a high level or in their basin? Would they model across all 5 scenarios or just some subset of those? And then are there going to, I'm sure there will be some of the assumptions that we've made that need to, or one basin may decide that they want to change. If a basin makes a change, how does that match with modeling across other basins? Are these things that need to be determined globally across basins, or would there be some leeway for some kind of standardized subset to model in one way and then allow for some tweaking in another? A good example of this that maybe helps frame up the level of detail is, we've just gotten a lot of things that have come up in the modeling that weren't really a consideration in the initial tag discussions. A lot of that was on methodology and some of the bigger issues around agriculture immunity, or how you would kind of implement the process of the methodology of using the CDSS. But as we've dug into it, a good example would be Free River. As we've gone into the model, we've realized, okay, there's this Free River, we can't actually split it in the model. The model doesn't allow us to split that equally between ag and muni. So if we can't split it, where does it go? And if we're not trying to model IPPs, you'll recall that in this process, there are no IPPs being modeled. So think about that as you're thinking about, what the BIP update should entail. If we're not trying to make decisions around what an IPP is or how a basin might react, maybe the most logical process is just to leave Free River in the river for ag to take, because that's the process that currently matches what's done today. If we leave it in the river, then there's potential issues with compact obligations, and maybe that doesn't accurately reflect the future. So this is just one example of any number of key decisions or assumptions that we're trying to think through, that we are documenting, that would be things that the basins can review, and I think hopefully help start to set up some of the level of detail and complexity that really maybe helps set the stage for why a general contractor model working through the local basins to kind of work with local contractors and help better wrap their heads around the level of detail is helpful. But we wanted to at least kind of frame up some of the things that we've been thinking about for you to think about and for us to discuss as we move forward. So recommendations and the roadmap, just again to kind of hit the nail on the head, you know, this group is not the final say, it's the first say, and it's really you know, the best, your best support in helping us think through some of the things that we're thinking about and better understand where we might want to take things and what works best from the basin level. We have some ideas. This matrix is one example, but we may not have gotten it right. And, you know, we are really trying to, as I said in the beginning, be more transparent and more collaborative. And you guys represent the kind of the first foray into that effort of really trying to be more transparent about the process and help us really set basins up for success moving into this next phase. This next phase will really culminate with the C9 Summit. The technical update will be out in July, and we're looking to get some input from you guys on some of the ideas around some of these recommendations that we would include. So if depending on, you know, where we get to in the next meetings, we may not have the level of detail to say, yeah, I've got all the information in front of me to make the best decision on what my basin should model, but you might have some thoughts around, gosh, I think like modeling 5 different ways maybe doesn't make the most sense, but I would like to at least see one standard model across the basins. That kind of level of input is going to be really helpful for us and helpful to pass on to any of the consultants working on the BIPs. So what this is the best informed direction to add value to the BIP updates, and we really appreciate your guys' help with that effort. And hopefully at the summit we can highlight whether we call it a roadmap or framework or guidance from this group for, you know, the larger team to kick around and help kind of better define. And then of course I think just like as we're seeing with the technical update, the devil's in the details, and as kind of new details emerge and each basin digs into some of the decisions or assumptions that have been made in our process, they can kind of better inform the basins at the local level of here's what works, here's what doesn't work. So questions. So hopefully everybody logged in. We can bring up those instructions, but if you're logged on the phone, we'd like some help just thinking through this process of where we're at today now that we're 4 meetings in, to help us understand a little bit about what's worked well and what we need to change. So right now the question is, what's worked well? Name one thing that resonated or that you feel is working well about this implementation working group, and that poll should be up. Okay, looks like we've got some input weighed in here, and we will take that and try to translate some of this back, but definitely got some positive feedback on things, just input, being iterative, involving various groups, clarifying our process, and kind of statewide level as well as basin level. So next, help us name one thing you'd like to see or that you'd like us to change in the process. Fair game if you say technical difficulty, but any other thoughts? We really do want to make this meaningful. We're hoping to maximize the use of your time, and we certainly don't want this to feel like a waste for anybody. So if there's something that we need to talk about more, let us know.
Good. I think at the next meeting too, we can have them out.
And for anybody that can't, for some reason, log in either online or on their phone, please feel free to email us any comments you have as well, or use the chat box. Yeah.
I think that's defining roles the contractors move forward versus the roundtable members.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will take that input and do a bit of a report out last time and kind of see what we can change in our process to honor that, especially I think some of the things around being more interactive. Hopefully now that you'll have some stuff to really dig into, we can have a little bit more of a two-way dialogue once you guys have had some time to play around with it.
I might add, if you had an idea or you were thinking about it, feel free to elaborate via email on one of those comments. I know the word cloud doesn't provide a lot of room for explaining.
So working group, moving forward, will kind of inform input on today's discussion. So again, the things that we talked about today, whether it's the matrix or the kind of the scope of the BIP update, certainly looking to take a deeper dive into that next time, maybe flesh out some of these ideas around what kind of plans need to be included when you're thinking about plan integration into the BIP updates. And really, we started to kind of talk a little bit about, and to the extent that we can get there and have even materials on our end updated and ready, we're still in the process of modeling now. We'd like to continue to get your input on where to head in terms of recommendations that would go into the technical update or into the SWASI update that would help kind of lay some of the framework of things and a bit of the marching orders of where basins might want to focus attention. So some of those will probably be a bit broader. Again, it's fair to say that by the time this process is kind of wrapping up, SWASI won't necessarily be out. We'll have that ready in July. But as we get the technical update farther along and we can better kind of highlight some of the issues that we're facing, there may be some room where you can talk about things, again, like modeling. Does it make sense to model all 5 scenarios, for example, or should basins consider some subset of that, or does it not make sense in your basin to model at all? It's fair game. Like, that's the kind of input that we're looking for. So moving forward, this is what you can expect. Again, we will have these documents in your inbox tomorrow for you to play around with. We'd like to get input back by April 17th, if possible. We heard deadlines work, so if we can ask for some feedback on or before April 17th, that would at least allow us a little bit of time to get kind of some of that pulled together for our next meeting. As Megan said, if you have additional thoughts or want to elaborate more on what's working, not working, please go ahead and email us that. You can email any of us individually as you like, or call anytime. That's great too. And then last, I would say just to remember that all these documents are online. All of our sessions are recorded and online. If there are other people that need to hear it, or you want to go back and hear something again that was said, these documents will get posted online as well. And same goes for the technical webinars. So just a reminder that we do have technical webinars that have more specific information about where we're at with the technical update. So today's is actually following this call, and it'll be on the MNSSI status of just kind of some snapshots of what we're seeing in the technical update. So feel free to plug into those as well. So with that, we have time. So we've got some questions that are maybe filtering in, and we can also just kind of let that happen online if there's a few of them. If people have questions, let's open up the lines to some dialogue.
So we've got a question from Philip Johnson. Could conflict with Ben Wade's meeting be corrected, the Joint Water Availability and Flood Task Force meeting? Good question, Phil. We went back and forth trying to find a time that worked for this, and we were aware of that conflict, unfortunately. I think we've got these on everybody's calendars and pretty well set, and it was an issue of kind of just finding the lesser evil in which conflicts we had out there. So I don't think we can change these, unfortunately, at this point, but we are aware of that conflict, and our apologies for folks who are trying to be 2 places at once. And we do have the recordings that Russ had just mentioned, so we will be posting these, which I know is less than ideal, especially for the sake of interaction. But but yeah, we just couldn't hit everything. We have a lot of different recurring meetings with various people and various entities across the state, so we just had to pick a time and run with it.
Any other questions?
Any other panel questions?
We are happy to stay on the line, and of course, always happy to get feedback via phone calls and emails and whatever else works. I would also just remind us that we had reserved an hour and a half for each of these different calls, but thinking that we would likely take only an hour. So again, we're happy to stay on longer, but also happy to respect your time and let folks move on to everything else you've got going on.
I do have a question or a comment.
Sure.
Hi, this is Phil Johnson. With regards to the spreadsheet that you're going to be spreading out for us to look at, that's great. And there was a question or a comment whether or not, previous projects had been input into this kind of a matrix, and you answered no. But I think that at some juncture, it'd probably be beneficial for us to look at a project input into the spreadsheet, matrix at some juncture, so we can see how it would, how it vets out. So do you think that you guys could just pick a couple projects or even, one or two that are of different scope and tier level, just to input them in there and so we can see how it plays out? Or would that be something that you guys could do after we initially review it?
That's a really good question, Phil. I think yes. The answer is yes, absolutely. I think it makes perfect sense, of course, to try something out with real world project data. At this point, we have not done that yet. Of course, we were trying to think through it, all these different questions and categories with an eye to kind of our experience of different projects and where they fall on the spectrum and kind of what data is available or might not be available. But absolutely, I think that would be the appropriate next step. I don't think we probably would not do that when we send out that draft prototype tomorrow.
I'm not asking you to. No. Yeah.
Sure, that's great. But I think I agree. I think that's a wonderful point. I think that's something we should do in the near future.
Sure.
Hey, Phil, this is Russ. I also wanted to add to that, just say first, thanks for being on the phone. I remember this topic kind of being one that I remember your comments in the Southwest really helping me kind of think through this process and see where it might be helpful. So I'm happy to have you on the call. So I mean, building on what Greg said, I think the first thing is we need to know before we can run anything through this matrix, did we even get the language right? You may just look at this and say, this doesn't match, or it could be totally on point. We did our best, but I want to make sure that it aligns before we do anything. It's one of the columns that you're going to see in here, and this is one that we probably need some help with and didn't talk to earlier, but it has a question of how much of the data in that list of kind of that critical list of 20 have been met. So we can send that list out of those 20 items too, and maybe some thoughts around which subset of those are the absolute most critical. So we heard Kevin McBride say, gosh, firm yield might be hard in some cases. So maybe it doesn't make sense to have that be, the one most critical thing you have to have, but maybe for tier one, it does. Maybe your tier one project is always going to have that. So if we could get some help through this process working with you guys, I think that we'll also have some outputs of maybe from the technical update of just where we have those gaps, and we have that a little bit, but we'll have a spreadsheet that kind of helps better define that. And that's one way that we could plug a few projects in once we know we've got the language right.
Right on.
And then we got another question that came in from Melly. She was asking, when will the info regarding each basin BIP be available? I don't want to overcommit, so right now we'll just say that we'll have that ready by our next call. Ideally, we'd be able to send that out in advance, but we may not be able to. So by the next call, we'll have it, and then we would post those items to the website, just like with all the information that we're doing after. So I think the safest bet is if it's something that you're looking to share or run by anybody else, it's probably safe to say after our next call that would be available, but we'll do our best to get something out sooner, especially as we're kind of cognizant on to make this and honor some of the comments we heard today about being more interactive, that it'd probably be helpful for you guys to have some eyes on things ahead of time. So hopefully we can get that out sooner.
So I get a question. I guess ultimately, is this process going to be part, of a standardization across the state, and ultimately these things will be submitted via a portal, and then they will go to, the various basins wherever they're being applied from, or?
Yeah, good question. I think so. The hope is that, yes, we would have an online database that would be a portal where project providers or proponents could enter their own information. Similar to what we have now for the water use and conservation data reporting for House Bill 1051. And right. So with that, for example, you need a login. It's a simple process to get a login, but just not that anybody on the street can just go start entering data, or you get various folks on the internet doing that. So that would be the hope, and then we would have all sorts of different reporting features, and then roundtables could use this. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the goal is far above and beyond just tracking, projects that may apply for water supply reserve funds, but to really, have a global database of planned projects throughout the state that would need funding from all sorts of different sources, and really to help with the funding conversation, as Russ had mentioned earlier. We all know we need more funding for implementation of the water plan, but to have better data on exactly what that is helps all of us. And one example that we've looked at is the CDOT website that has a lot more information about the kind of their wish list and all these major projects and the dollar amounts that correspond to it and kind of the infrastructure components that are needed. So really just starting to build that information that we need.
Awesome. Yeah, the applications are pretty wide and far-reaching.
There you go. Thanks so much for your involvement and your questions. Keep them coming. We're excited to have people plug in.
No, this is great. I'm really glad to be part of this. Anyway, thank you guys. You did another great job. I'm going to go ahead and take off.
Great. Thanks again.
Okay. Greg, Kevin, I got one. Thank you for doing this. It is very complicated, and I can only imagine what you're going through with 5 different scenarios. As you try to standardize, though, I just want to make sure that you think about how to. It's not so much a project and its yield for a particular thing anymore that we're after. I think the challenge in the water plan is to try to, integrate some of the different uses, as you all well know. And it's difficult to capture with a, individual metric, like the size of the project, because there could be a project that is a key link to making many other projects work together to meet multiple needs. And as you try to standardize things across the state, I think it will be important to make sure that you allow each basin, which really is going to understand its operations ideally, better than anyone, the creativity to do that and make the decisions, locally, with monies that have been made available the way you have in the past, rather than try to rank things against each other in different basins. So that just be my input on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Kevin. And I think that you're right. That is really one of the biggest tricks to this whole exercise, is kind of allowing the creativity. And of course, we want, like you said, all sorts of different uses to be integrated in a way that can meet, the whole plethora of goals that we have in the water plan. And so it's difficult when you have restoration projects and dam rehabilitation projects, and it's just the whole universe of the projects that we have. And then, of course, to incorporate the local knowledge as to what's really important, and that, we're not going to have this square peg round hole issues once we create this. I would say, the last thing we would want to do is to pit projects against each other between the basins. I think we certainly need to keep that in mind as we develop this. But it's quite the contrary. What we want to do is just provide more support for all the projects that are out there throughout the state, and that we can kind of lift all the projects up as we're all seeking more funding, especially with conversations about potential implementation funding sources moving forward. But those are really, really good points to keep in mind. And thanks again for your involvement.
Yeah, Kevin, this is Russ. Just wanted to say, echo what Greg just said. Thank you so much for your comments today, and in the past, your thoughts are definitely on my mind as I was trying to draft this thing, and just even thinking about like a top tier project, making sure that it responds to life safety, but maybe it's also more of a resilience issue. Maybe the issue of criticality isn't based in the situation today, but in a drought year, it might be really extreme. So, see what you think, and definitely would continue, love to have you continue to engage in this and let us know where we got it right and wrong.
Well, you all have a very tough job, so I'm not really, I'll be the last one to anymore try to pass judgment on that, but we'll try to help where we can.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And this is Melly Whiting. I just I guess to echo some of that theme, I think this is just something, when we're talking about prioritizing, coming with a matrix such as this, we really need to have those conversations in the roundtable. In the Southwest, we've gone back and forth about how we prioritize things, and ended up, we were short in budget. We ended up basically reducing everybody's ask instead of making the tough decisions of turning down some projects and allowing others to proceed. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's a conversation that, I'm in the Southwest Basin Roundtable, but before going too far and commenting a lot about it, I there definitely needs to be a very lengthy conversation within the table about these topics. Even before I can say comment on the matrix specifically, the whole conversation of whether we're going to impose this or not needs to happen.
Thanks, Melly. Those are good comments, and I remember being at that roundtable meeting when you guys made that decision, and that was definitely an interesting way. And I think, like I said, Phil's thoughts too on just how to prioritize things were something that resonated with me, and even your thoughts at the IBCC meeting of just wanting to do things was weighing on me heavily of just how we could engage you guys in this process. But I like that higher level thought too of not just digging in the weeds in the matrix, but also just thinking about, kind of buy-in at a global level. Well, we can hang on for another minute. It doesn't look like there's other questions coming in. We've got 15 minutes available, but maybe we'll get another minute. If nothing else comes in, we'll probably jump off the line. But just for anybody that's there, thanks again for staying on.
And as Russ mentioned, we do have that next tech webinar coming up at noon. If anyone is curious about the technical update in the municipal and self-supplied industrial methodology that we've got.
Well, I'll just say thank you as well, and I'll go ahead and sign off. I have nothing to add at this point.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks again.
Talk to you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.